At 9:47 on a Sunday night, my daughter-in-law removed me from my grandson's baptism with one text message. She did not say I was sick. She did not say the church was too small. She did not even pretend there had been a misunderstanding. She wrote, "Martin, after discussing the final vision for Oliver's baptism, we've decided your presence would not match the aesthetic of the ceremony. We're trying to create something refined and visually consistent. We hope you understand." I read the message 3 times. Then I looked at the framed photograph on my mantel. It showed my late wife Helen holding our son, Andrew, when he was only 6 months old. Andrew was laughing. Helen was looking at him as if nothing else in the world mattered. 35 years later, that same boy had allowed his wife to tell me I was not refined enough to watch his son receive a blessing in a church I had helped save from bankruptcy. I did not shout. I did not throw my phone. I placed it face down on the coffee table and listened to the silence of my house. That silence hurt more than the message. My name is Martin Hale. I am 68 years old, and for most of my life I worked in commercial construction. I did not inherit a company. I started with a used pickup truck, 2 ladders, and a toolbox that belonged to my father. I built medical offices, schools, apartment buildings, and churches across Massachusetts. I knew how to read a blueprint before I knew how to read a balance sheet. I knew how to pour concrete in freezing weather, how to calm an angry inspector, and how to finish a job when everyone else said it could not be done. I also knew what people like my daughter-in-law thought when they looked at me. They saw the large hands, the old scar near my eyebrow, the plain suits, the voice that still carried a little of the neighborhood where I grew up. They did not see the payrolls I had covered when projects went bad. They did not see the workers' children I had helped send to college. They did not see the nights Helen and I ate canned soup because every dollar had gone back into the business. They saw a man who did not match the room. My daughter-in-law, Celeste, came from a family that cared deeply about rooms. Her mother, Vivian Whitmore, could enter any gathering and tell within 10 seconds who had money, who had borrowed money, and who was pretending not to care about money. Celeste had learned from her. She was beautiful, polished, and careful. Every photograph looked planned. Every meal had a theme. Every holiday had a color palette. Even her pregnancy announcement had been filmed by a professional videographer in a rented garden. When Andrew married her, I tried. I paid for the rehearsal dinner. I smiled when Vivian changed the menu without asking me. I wore the tuxedo Celeste chose, even though the collar felt like a hand around my throat. I stood where the photographer told me to stand. After Oliver was born, I tried even harder. I paid the deposit on the nanny. I bought the crib. I created an education account. I helped Andrew and Celeste refinance their house when Andrew's law firm reduced his hours, and when Celeste announced that Oliver would be baptized at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church. I felt something close to peace. St. Matthew's mattered to me. 20 years earlier, the church had nearly closed. Its roof leaked. Its heating system had failed. The basement flooded every spring. The congregation had raised some money, but not enough. Helen loved that church. She organized fundraisers. She baked pies. She called everyone she knew. When the final estimate came in, they were still short by almost $800,000. I covered the difference. I did not put my name on the building. I did not ask for a plaque. Helen said a church should belong to the people who prayed there, not to the person who paid the largest bill. After she died, I continued supporting St. Matthew's quietly. The new fellowship hall was funded through my family foundation. The children's music program survived because I paid its yearly deficit. The church office rented space in one of my buildings for $1 a year. Celeste knew all of that. She also knew I was paying for Oliver's baptism reception, the church fee, the caterer, the florist, the photographer, the custom cake, the rented tables, the string trio, even the small embroidered blankets that would be given to the children attending. The total cost was just over $72,000. I had thought it was foolish, but Andrew had said, "Dad, it means a lot to Celeste." That sentence had become a key that opened my wallet. Now I was not invited. I called Andrew. He did not answer. I called again. Voicemail. 10 minutes later, a text arrived. "Dad, I know you're upset. Celeste should have worded it differently. Can we discuss this tomorrow?" I replied with one sentence. "Do you agree that I should be excluded?" He did not answer for 46 minutes. Then he wrote, "It's complicated." That was when something inside me became calm. Not healed. Calm. There is a difference. Pain makes you want to react. Clarity makes you want to understand. I walked into my home office and turned on the desk lamp. Helen's old reading glasses were still in the top drawer. I had never moved them. I took out a legal pad and wrote down every expense connected to Andrew and Celeste during the past 4 years. Wedding support, home repairs, private medical bills, vacations described as family restoration trips, the nanny, Oliver's nursery, the baptism. When I finished, the total was more than $1 million. I stared at the number until it stopped looking like money. Then it started looking like permission. Every time I rescued them, I had taught them that I would accept whatever they did next. At 4:18 in the morning, I called my assistant, Ruth Delaney. Ruth had worked with me for 29 years. She had the patience of a judge and the memory of an elephant. She could find a missing contract from 2004 before most people found their car keys. She answered on the third ring. "Martin," she said, "either someone is dead or someone is about to wish they had behaved better. I need your help." Her voice changed immediately. "What happened?" I read Celeste's message aloud. Ruth was silent for several seconds. Then she asked, "And Andrew?" "He says it's complicated." "No," she said. "It is painful. It is insulting. It is cowardly. It is not complicated." I closed my eyes. Ruth continued, "Come to the office at 7. Bring every baptism contract you have." "What are we doing?" "We are going to find out exactly whose perfect day you have been paying for." By 7:15 the next morning, the conference table was covered with invoices. Ruth moved through them with a yellow marker and a cup of coffee. "Church," she said. "Caterer? Paid. Florist, deposit paid. Music? Paid in full. Half paid. Rentals? Paid." She looked at me. "Celeste made sure your money matched the aesthetic." I gave a humorless laugh. At 8:30, Ruth's expression changed. She held up the church agreement. "Martin, the contract is in your foundation's name." "I know. The church asked for a charitable contribution rather than a private event fee." "That means Celeste is not the contracting party." "You are." I leaned back. Ruth opened another folder. "The caterer is Maple and Ash. Wes, they rent their kitchen from Hale Properties." I had forgotten. "The florist, North Row Botanicals, has a studio in the Harbor Building." "One of ours," I said. "The photographer shoots our annual company reports." I nodded. "The rental company is owned by the brother of your former project manager." I felt the shape of the situation forming. Ruth was not smiling. "This is not about controlling people," she said. "We do not threaten leases. We do not trade favors. We do not punish businesses for working with your family." I agree. "But every vendor has the right to know that the person paying for the event has been removed because he does not look appropriate." I looked through the glass wall of the conference room at the city below. For years I had believed influence was something loud men used in dark rooms. I had been wrong. Real influence was memory. It was the restaurant owner who remembered that you had reduced her rent during the pandemic. It was the florist who remembered that you had paid her employees after a pipe burst in her shop. It was the priest who remembered your wife sitting beside frightened families at funerals. Power was not always fear. Sometimes it was the record of how you had treated people when you had nothing to gain. Call the church first, I said. Ruth did. She spoke to Reverend Paul Mercer and read Celeste's message exactly as it had been written. She did not add emotion. She did not accuse anyone. She simply explained that the foundation paying for the baptism had been informed that its representative, the child's grandfather, would not be allowed to attend because he did not fit the ceremony's visual plan. Reverend Mercer asked for time. At 9:40, he called back. Ruth put him on speaker. "Martin," he said, "I am deeply sorry. I was told you had chosen not to attend because of a scheduling conflict." I looked at Ruth. There it was, the first lie. Reverend Mercer continued. "Celeste told us that the family wanted a small ceremony and that you preferred a private visit later. I was told I did not match the aesthetic." His breath caught. "That language has no place in a church." "I agree." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I cannot perform a baptism while the child's family is using the sacrament to humiliate someone. I will postpone the ceremony until the family resolves this honestly." "I am not asking you to cancel it." "You did not ask. I am making a pastoral decision." After the call ended, Ruth wrote one word on the legal pad, CRCH. Then she drew a line through it. The caterer was next. Marisol Grant, the owner of Maple and Ash, answered personally. Ruth explained what had happened. Marisol said, "Martin paid for this. Wes." And they removed him. Wes. Because of his appearance. That is what the message says. Marisol's voice became cold. "I won't serve that event, Marisol," I said. "I am not asking you to withdraw. You once kept my restaurant alive for 6 months and never told anyone. This is my decision." By 10:30, the caterer was gone. At 11, the florist withdrew. At 11:20, the photographer withdrew. At noon, the string trio returned the payment. The rental company called at 12:40 and asked whether I wanted the tables delivered somewhere else. I said no. By 1 in the afternoon, Celeste's perfect event had a guest list, a color palette, and nothing else. My phone had been ringing for an hour. First Celeste, then Vivian, then Andrew, then Celeste again. I did not answer. At 1:15, Ruth placed another file in front of me. "This came from accounting last week," she said. I did not think it was connected. It was a reimbursement request from Andrew, $28,000 for emergency household expenses. The receipts were strange. A private club payment, a luxury clothing boutique, a deposit to an event designer, and a transfer to Whitmore Heritage Consulting, Vivian's company. "Did we pay this?" I asked. No, the amounts did not match the descriptions, so I held it. I read the transfer line again. "Why is Andrew sending my money to his mother-in-law's company?" Ruth's face tightened. "That is what we need to find out." The humiliation had started with a text. Now it smelled like fraud. I called my accountant, Daniel Cho, and asked him to review every family reimbursement from the previous 2 years. Then I called the attorney who managed my trust. By 3, we had found a pattern. Andrew had submitted household expenses. Celeste had submitted childcare expenses. But several payments had gone to businesses connected to Vivian, an image consultant, an event company, a nonprofit foundation with no public programs. The amounts were not enormous individually. Together, they totaled almost $200,000. I felt sick. Not because of the money, because Andrew had signed the requests. At 30:17, he called again. This time, "Dad, what did you do?" His voice shook. I told the truth. The church postponed the baptism. The caterer canceled. Everyone is backing out. They made their own decisions. Celeste is hysterical. I imagine losing an event is upsetting. This is not funny. No, it is not. He lowered his voice. "Dad, call them. Tell them this was a family misunderstanding. Was I invited? Silence. Day, was I invited? Celeste was under pressure. From whom? Her mother. The photographer. The church committee. I don't know. The priest says Celeste told him I had a scheduling conflict. Another silence. Did you know she lied? I knew she wanted to keep things calm. Be lying about me. He exhaled. Please don't turn this into something bigger. I looked at the reimbursement file. It is already bigger. What does that mean? It means you and I need to meet. Tonight. No. You will come to my office in 1 hour. Bring Celeste. Bring every document connected to the baptism and every reimbursement you have submitted to my family foundation. His breathing changed. That told me more than words. Why? He asked. Because I am done paying for things I am not allowed to understand. Andrew arrived without Celeste. He walked into the conference room wearing the same navy suit he wore to court. His tie was loose. His face looked 10 years older than it had the week before. Where is your wife? I asked. She refused to come. Then we will begin without her. Ruth sat at the far end of the table. Daniel, my accountant, sat beside her. My attorney, Rebecca Stein, joined by video. Andrew stopped when he saw them. What is this? A conversation with records. He looked at the folders. Dad, this is a family matter. You made it a financial matter every time you asked me to pay. I slid Celeste's message across the table. First question. Did you approve this? He rubbed his face. I knew she wanted to reduce the guest list. That is not what I asked. He stared at the message. No, he said quietly. I did not approve those words. Did you know I was being excluded? Wes. Did you object? He did not answer. I felt the last small hope inside me go still. I pushed the reimbursement file toward him. Explain these. He looked at the first page and went pale. They're household expenses. No. They are payments to companies controlled by Vivian. His eyes moved toward the door. Andrew. He sat back down. She said the family needed help. What family? Celeste's family. So you took money intended for your household and transferred it to your mother-in-law. It was temporary. How much? He swallowed. I don't know. Daniel knows. Daniel opened his laptop. $193,480 over 22 months. Andrew closed his eyes. I asked, why? He spoke slowly, like a man walking toward a cliff. The Whitmores are broke. The room became quiet. He continued. Vivian's husband made bad investments. The house has 2 loans. The club dues are behind. Their foundation is nearly empty. Celeste has been trying to protect the family name. By using my money. She said it would be repaid. Did you believe her? At first. And later. He looked at me. Later I didn't know how to stop. There it was. Not a mastermind. Not a thief with a clever plan. My son was a coward trapped inside a lie he had helped build. Why exclude me from the baptism? I asked. Andrew gave a broken laugh. Because Vivian invited people she wanted to impress. She told Celeste you would talk too loudly, wear the wrong suit, tell construction stories, and make the Whitmores look dependent on you. They are dependent on me. I know. Does Celeste? Wes. Then why pretend? Because pretending is all that family has left. The door opened. Celeste walked in. She wore a cream coat and dark glasses. Vivian followed behind her in a gray dress and pearls. Neither woman looked at Ruth, Daniel, or the screen. Celeste looked directly at me. You have destroyed my son's baptism. I stood. No. I removed my money from a performance. You embarrassed us. You removed me from my grandson's baptism because I embarrassed you. That message was poorly phrased. It was perfectly clear. Vivian stepped forward. Martin, this vindictive display is beneath you. I looked at her. You used my foundation as your personal account. Her expression did not change. I have no idea what you mean. Daniel turned his laptop around. The transfers were displayed on the screen. For the first time, Vivian's face moved. But I saw it. Celeste looked at her mother. What is that? Vivian said nothing. Andrew whispered, Tell her. Celeste turned on him. Tell me what? He stared at the table. Your parents are in serious financial trouble. Celeste laughed once. It sounded sharp and frightened. No, they are not. Wes, he said. They are. My father has investments. Most of them failed. The house, mortgaged twice. The foundation, nearly empty. Celeste removed her glasses. Her eyes were red. She looked at Vivian. Mom. Vivian straightened. This is not the place. It became the place when you made my father pay, Andrew said. Vivian's voice hardened. Your father was happy to help. I answered before Andrew could. I was happy to help my son. I was not happy to finance a lie. Celeste looked from her mother to her husband. Then she looked at me. You knew. I learned today. Her face changed again, but not into regret. Into calculation. Martin, we can resolve this privately. Restore the vendors. We can invite you. We can make a statement about a misunderstanding. I almost admired how quickly she reorganized the disaster. Would I match the aesthetic now? I asked. She flinched. Please. Do you want me there, Celeste? Of course. No. You want the church, the caterer, the flowers, and the photographs. I am the price you are willing to pay to get them back. Her mouth tightened. You are Oliver's grandfather. I was his grandfather last night. Nobody spoke. Rebecca's voice came through the speaker. Martin, would you like me to continue? Wes. She explained that the family foundation would stop all personal reimbursements immediately. Any unsupported payment would be referred for a formal audit. The house loan guarantee I had provided for Andrew and Celeste would not be renewed when it expired. The education account for Oliver would remain protected, but no adult could borrow against it. Then she addressed Vivian. Whitmore Heritage Consulting will receive a demand for records concerning all transfers from Hale family entities. If the documentation is insufficient, repayment will be required. Vivian's face became rigid. You cannot threaten me. Rebecca answered calmly. That was not a threat. It was an accounting procedure. Celeste looked at me. You would do this to your own family. I sat down. I did this because you are my family. Strangers would never have received this many chances. Andrew began to cry. Not loudly. He covered his face with both hands. I had seen my son cry only 3 times in his adult life. At his mother's funeral, when Oliver was born, and now, I'm sorry, he said. Dade. Celeste stared at him, as if his apology were a betrayal. Vivian gathered her handbag. This conversation is finished. No. Celeste said. Everyone looked at her. She faced her mother. How much? Vivian's jaw tightened. How much money did you take? I did what was necessary to protect this family. How much? Vivian did not answer. Celeste's voice broke. You told me Martin was trying to control us. You told me we deserved his support. You told me Andrew agreed. Andrew looked up. I never agreed to exclude Dad. You did not stop me. No, he said. I didn't. That was the first honest thing he had said all day. Celeste sat down slowly. The perfect coat, the perfect hair, the perfect posture, none of it could protect her now. She looked small. For a moment, I saw not the woman who had rejected me, but a daughter raised to believe that appearances were more important than truth. Understanding her did not excuse her, but it changed the kind of justice I wanted. I did not want to destroy her. I wanted the pretending to stop. The baptism can still happen, I said. Celeste looked up. Not the reception, not the photographers, not the performance, the baptism. Reverend Mercer had offered a new date 3 weeks later, a normal Sunday service. No private guest list. No designer decorations. No cameras except the phones people carried in their pockets. Anyone from the congregation could attend. I continued. Oliver will be baptized in the same church. But there will be no special production paid for by me. Afterward, I will host lunch in the fellowship hall. Sandwiches, soup and cake. Everyone is welcome. Celeste stared at me. And you expect me to agree to that? No. I expect you to decide whether this day is about your son receiving a blessing or about you receiving photographs. 3 weeks later, I arrived at St. Matthew's at 9 in the morning. I wore a dark blue suit Helen had chosen for me years earlier. The cuffs were slightly worn. I did not replace it. The church smelled like old wood, candle wax, and coffee from the fellowship hall. There were no white roses. No imported linens. No string trio. A group of children was practicing a hymn near the front. One of them sang too loudly. Another kept missing the words. It was perfect. Ruth stood near the side aisle, wearing a red scarf. Marisol from the catering company had sent soup and bread free of charge, though I had insisted on paying. Maeve, the florist, brought a small arrangement from her own garden. Not for the photographs. For Helen's memorial table in the fellowship hall. Andrew arrived carrying Oliver. He looked nervous but peaceful. He came to me and stopped. Dad, I held out my arms. He placed my grandson against my chest. Oliver grabbed my tie and smiled. That was all it took. 3 weeks of anger broke open inside me, and I had to look away so Andrew would not see my eyes fill. I'm getting help, he said quietly. For what? For why I stayed silent. For why I kept trying to make everyone happy by letting the wrong people get hurt. I nodded. That is a good start. He swallowed. I moved out. I looked at him. Celeste and I are not ending things. Not yet. But I told her we cannot live together until we learn how to be honest. Is she coming? I don't know. The service began. Reverend Mercer spoke about baptism as a promise made in public. A promise to guide a child toward truth. A promise to protect the weak. A promise to reject cruelty, pride, and falsehood. His words landed harder than any accusation. When it was time, Andrew carried Oliver to the baptismal font. I stood beside him. There was an empty space on the other side. Then the church door opened. Celeste walked in alone. No cream coat, no designer hat, no mother. She wore a simple navy dress and carried no handbag. Every face turned toward her. She paused. For 1 second, I thought she might leave. Then she walked down the aisle. She stopped beside me. I'm sorry, she whispered. I did not answer immediately. She looked at Oliver. I thought if everything looked perfect, no one would see how afraid I was. Afraid of what? That without the name, the house, the clubs, and the pictures, there would be nothing special about me. I looked at my grandson. There is nothing wrong with being ordinary, Celeste. Most of life happens there. Tears filled her eyes. I know that now. Knowing is the beginning. Living differently is the proof. She nodded. Reverend Mercer waited without rushing us. Then Celeste stepped beside Andrew. The 4 of us stood around the font. When the water touched Oliver's head, he cried. The congregation laughed softly. Andrew laughed too. Celeste cried. And I felt Helen beside me not as a ghost, but as a memory strong enough to stand on its own. After the service, we went downstairs. There were folding tables and mismatched chairs. Children ran between adults. Someone spilled lemonade. The cake leaned slightly to one side. People ate soup from paper bowls and told stories too loudly. I matched the aesthetic perfectly. Vivian did not attend. 2 months later, her consulting company entered a repayment agreement with my foundation. She and her husband sold the large house and moved into a smaller condominium. I did not foreclose. I did not expose them publicly. I did not need to. The truth had already taken the one thing Vivian valued most, the ability to control the story. Andrew resigned from his law firm, and accepted a position at a legal aid organization. He earned less money and slept better. Celeste started therapy. She sold several expensive pieces of jewelry and used the money to repay part of what had been taken. She also began volunteering at St. Matthew's Community Kitchen. At first, I assumed it was another performance. Then winter came, and she continued showing up before sunrise, wearing old sneakers and tying her hair back with a rubber band. One morning, I saw her washing soup pots beside a woman who had no idea Celeste once hired a consultant to select napkin colors. That was when I believed change might be possible. As for me, I changed too. I stopped using money as a substitute for boundaries. I stopped solving every problem before the people I loved felt its consequences. I updated my estate plan. Oliver remained protected. Andrew would receive support in stages, tied to responsibility rather than appearances, and I moved Helen's reading glasses from the desk drawer to the mantel beside our photograph. For years, I had thought love meant always saying yes, paying the bill, opening the door, making the trouble disappear. But love without truth is not kindness. It is permission. The day my daughter-in-law said, I did not match the aesthetic, she thought she was removing one inconvenient old man from a photograph. Instead, she removed the curtain from an entire family. The church disappeared. The flowers disappeared. And when all the beautiful decorations were gone, we finally saw what was underneath. Fear, debt, pride, cowardice, and, buried beneath all of it, a family that still had one chance to become honest. My revenge was not destroying Celeste's perfect day. My revenge was refusing to pay for the lie. And the justice was watching my grandson begin his life, surrounded not by perfect people, but by people who had finally stopped pretending.